If your SaaS startup isn't using infrastructure as code, you're probably losing valuable time, money, and missing out on growth you didn't even know is possible. Most startup founders think infrastructure as code is overly technical, reserved only for massive companies with big engineering teams. But the reality, infrastructure as code has become incredibly easy and accessible, giving startups like yours huge advantages, accelerating growth, simplifying operations, and eliminating massive headaches. I'm Alex, with over 10 years of experience in the software development industry, and as a tech lead in Codelevate, I specialize in building cloud-based applications and leading development teams to deliver software effectively and scalably using modern architectures. In this video, you'll learn exactly what infrastructure as code is, clearly see how it compares to traditional methods, discover the best tools, and most importantly, uncover how easy it is to implement infrastructure as code to supercharge your startup. So starting, what is actually infrastructure as code? You are familiar with Google Cloud providers like AWS, Google Cloud, or Azure. Normally, creating services or databases involves clicking through interfaces, which seems simple initially, but quickly becomes complex and messy as your needs grow. Infrastructure as code flips this on its head by turning those manual clicks into reusable, clear code. Need another environment? Copy-paste, tweak a name, and you're done. So here in the example, what you can see is a traditional manual resource creation in AWS. The example that we have taken here is to create a server that can host our application. You can simply see that AWS and any cloud provider has created a very easy to use interface where you can configure the settings of your server. You have a lot of configurations and a lot of different possibilities, and some of them are actually filled in for you based on best practices. As we mentioned, that's great for a quick start, but with the growth of your application, your needs are also growing, and simply using only this UI is ineffective and actually can cause additional issues if you want to copy this environment or build a similar one. As mentioned, with infrastructure as code, you are using code. We have an example here of serverless framework and AWS CDK. In a second, I will show you other type of frameworks, but for now, just to illustrate the example between a user interface within the cloud provider and infrastructure as code, you can see here that it's way more simpler for a developer to configure this because the language and the syntax that we use are actually simple, either Node.js, Python, and any other language like AWS CDK supports Go, Python, Node.js, and other popular frameworks. And you can see here that very easily you can configure the configurations very similarly to the UI, but with the benefits of using infrastructure as code, as you will learn. In this example, it's just a simple YAML, which is a bit of different format, but again, it serves the same purposes. Now, you might wonder how complicated are these tools to use. Let's clear it up. Infrastructure as code has multiple powerful tools: Terraform, AWS CDK, CloudFormation, serverless framework, all making cloud management crystal clear and simple. We'll use AWS CDK today, but the ideas apply across the entire ecosystem. Just write your infrastructure needs as code, plain, readable, and simple. With these tools, you don't need a specialized team. Your current developers can handle everything themselves. But here's the best part. These tools don't just simplify setup, they provide massive strategic advantages your startup needs. So what are the key benefits of infrastructure as code for startups? Let's start with branch-based isolating testing environments. Imagine instantly starting and spinning up a fully isolated environment for each feature your developers create. Each feature gets its own environment automatically with infrastructure as code, drastically reducing integration issues. Your team moves faster, tests better, and deploys confidently every single time. The next benefit is cloud-agnostic flexibility. Infrastructure as code lets you instantly switch cloud providers if a better, cheaper opportunity arises. We've personally seen startups move infrastructures overnight to another provider, immediately cutting costs dramatically. You're never trapped or overpaying again, giving your startups freedom and flexibility. How this is achieved is that frameworks like Terraform, who are completely cloud agnostic, have the ability with the same syntax and the same code that you have written in your infrastructure as code to utilize different cloud providers, and Terraform under the hood calls the right APIs based on the cloud provider, but that does not change your code itself. However, tools like AWS CDK are specifically focused on resources within the AWS ecosystem. One advice I can give of choosing a framework is that make sure that the cloud provider has a good relationship of supporting the framework that you're about to use. This flexibility is built on another huge advantage of infrastructure as code: self-documented infrastructure. Your entire setup automatically documented in your code. AI tools like ChatGPT instantly can generate comprehensive, readable documentation, reduces onboarding time, and simplifies troubleshooting. The self-documented infrastructure is achieved as all of your resources and configurations are written in code. That means that someone can go into the code and immediately understand what is the architecture of your infrastructure, of your application. Leveraging AI tools for non-technical people or people who are not very familiar with the frameworks can be of great benefit, because the AI tools understand the framework and actually can generate very comprehensive documentations of your SaaS architecture. The next benefit is consistency across environments. With this benefit, you are having identical environments between production and your test environments. You can actually also have multiple test environments that you can utilize based on isolating specific features that you want to push to production. This dramatically reduces your bugs and allows for more rapid testing, as you're testing smaller features in an isolated environment that is a copy of production. The next benefit is easy CI/CD integration. If your startup decides to use infrastructure as code to define your resources and architecture, you are 70 to 80% there of completing and having a CI/CD pipeline. Since infrastructure as code is just a code that is executed in some environment, you can integrate that into your CI/CD pipeline and create rapid testing, automated deployments, and of course, improve your software delivery. Your team will not need to think about deploying your code and managing the process of deployment, possibly introducing human errors, but use infrastructure as code within your CI/CD pipeline to orchestrate and create all the resources that are needed and deploy actually your code. You will see that in our example in a second of how we are doing it here. Now let's go through a practical example and how we have developed one of our CI/CD pipelines together with infrastructure as code. This is actually a very high level process, but it will illustrate all of the topics that we discussed previously. First of all, we need to have some sort of a trigger. In this case, most of the time the trigger is pushing up of a new code. In that case, could be a new feature, fixing up a bug, anything that is introducing new code or changes to the code base. This triggering of the process will kick off our CI/CD pipeline. The next step is, since we want to be effective in the deployment of the resources, we need to detect what are the code changes. Is it on the front end or it's in the back end? Since our CI/CD pipeline automates both the deployment of the back end and front end, we need to decide what has changed so we know what process we need to trigger. The step before actually utilizing the infrastructure as code, most of the time you need to build your application. This could be very different depending on the framework that you're using, but usually there's always a step where you have to build your application so it is available to be deployed to the internet. That building of the application consists of multiple steps of installing dependencies, installing libraries, and setting up your project deployment. Then comes the step which you were utilizing infrastructure as code. The configurations are passed through the infrastructure as code, and based if it is a deployment to production or actually creating an isolated environment for a feature that we're building, this is all configured within the logic of the pipeline and provides different parameters to the infrastructure as code program, which based on these parameters, we're creating different type of if or else statements to make the configuration based on if it's a production environment or actually a test environment. All of that is managed by the infrastructure as code process, and the process of itself and the benefits coming with the infrastructure as code is that if there's any failure into deployments or actually errors, it will automatically revert back and making sure that the resources that we have tried to deploy, which have some sort of an error, are completely deleted by itself. If the deployment is successful and we have successfully tested the feature, the only thing we need to do is merge the changes of the code into our main branch, and that will trigger the process of deploying it to production. So the only thing a developer needs to do is push their code to the repository that the project is using, and everything is automatically handled and deployed through the CI/CD pipeline, but most importantly, through the infrastructure as code configurations. Then the last step, since our backend has been deployed, we deploy the front-end application, compiling it and building it. Usually in most of the cases, the front-end application has simpler resources that you need to deploy, but still there's within the CI/CD pipeline passing the configurations from the backend that are required within the front-end in order for the application to work correctly. This could be variables that are specific for the backend, like URLs, keys, etc., that the front-end can take after the backend has been deployed and use that dynamically. A very simple example that we have in our GitHub repository is exactly the steps that I mentioned. This is currently deploying via AWS. We have the detect changes. We have the building of the backend, which is actually compiling the code, which, as you can see, is located here. And after the backend is built, we use infrastructure as code to deploy and create the resources required in order to host that backend application. Then, if backend is successfully deployed, it goes to the front end and deploys the front end. But you see that 16 minutes have been spent on deleting non-existent resources, if that's the case, or creating the new resources automatically through the infrastructure as code. As you see, infrastructure as code is no longer complicated or out of reach for startups. It is straightforward, powerful, and provides clear, immediate benefits. Automatic documentation, easy scalability, consistency, flexibility, rapid testing, and flawless deployments. I hope this video helped you understand more about infrastructure as code and how this can help your startup grow and create a smooth deployment into your features. Thanks for watching. Let's scale your startup together. See you in the next video.